a lot up here. But these are the big ideas for the post-classical era. We're not going into tons of detail with this, but you are not going to see anything on the May exam that is before circa 1200. So no Greeks, no Romans, no Neolithic Revolution. That is not on there. It starts around about 1200 CE. So the earliest things that you'll see are from the Tang dynasty, Song dynasty, really. Abbasids, the expansion of Islam, and of all the different parts of the AP exam, post-classical era is going to have the least amount, all right, in terms of multiple choice questions and SNQs and LEQs. There will be no DBQ that's on the post-classical era, all right? DBQ is early modern era, so 1450 onwards up to the present. Anything is fair game, including topics that we may not have explicitly talked about, but the content would be used that we've learned in order to answer those prompts. So again, 1200 to 1450, the first big topic I want to address is the term state building. We used that, at least I did, first semester more so with the post-classical era and early modern era. If you see that phrase, state building, all that means is how did a nation, how did an empire arise? What did the governments use in order to gain power, maintain power, control their territory and their people? So think of what's allowing them to establish their empire and administer and consolidate their empire. So consolidate meaning to strengthen, okay? And there's lots of different tools that states, empires use in order to build up their power. So some things to think about. And I'm not going into tons of detail here. These are just big ideas for you to go back using that May exam review packet to focus in because you have the content knowledge. Things to think about would be centralized government versus decentralized government. What was the influence of religion on specific states? Did governments use religious tolerance, for example? Did they enforce a particular religion? What did they do regarding their diverse populations? If there's a heterogeneous, multicultural, multi-religious population, how did they try to consolidate those people, bring them together, integrate them into a state or empire? Also think about the role of trade or commerce. Always, governments are using taxation in order to acquire wealth for the spending that they carry out, whether it's road construction, expenses for military growth, defensive structures, whatever the case may be, taxation is always there. So think about what they're doing in order to acquire wealth, not just through taxation, but maybe protecting trade, because trade is essential for a state. So you were to know several different examples of post-classical states or empires. The ones that I've underlined here, those are the most important ones. All right? You should be able to explain their operations of state building, how they arose, how they administered their empires, and consolidated their empires. It's been a long time, but you actually wrote your second LEQ was on the administration and consolidation of post-classical empires. Do y'all remember that? Tracy does. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
All right. Most of y'all wrote about things like bureaucracies, divine right of rulers, taxation, developing large, powerful militaries. But you were asked to compare and contrast different states. A lot of people who did really well compared the Song dynasty, I think it was, to the Abbasids or to the Byzantines. Anyhow, again, the ones that are underlined are essential. Make sure you know them. The ones that aren't underlined, don't put as much focus. But any of these you should be able to discuss. But again, ones underlined, most important. So you are more likely to see Song dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, not the Umayyads, but the Abbasids. The Mali, in what region? Sub-Saharan Africa. It was linked to North Africa and the Mediterranean by what trade network? There's no sub-Saharan trade network. There is the trans-Saharan trade network. Yes, trans-Saharan. Silk Route does not go to Africa. All right, it is purely Asian. All right, but Mali, the Byzantine Empire. It's nice if you know, great if you know. If not, you'll be okay. The Kamakura Shogunate, also called a Bakufu, that's the feudal structure that first arose in Japan, followed by the Ashikaga Shogunate. So that's feudal Japan. Followed by Western Europe and their feudal systems. Lots of different states following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. And then you've got a whole collection of different city-states around Afro-Eurasia, including Venice and Genoa on the Mediterranean, which especially rose due to the effects of the Crusades. Malacca in what region? Southeast Asia. On what trade network? Indian Ocean. Good. And the Swahili coast. Give me a specific Swahili city-state. Not Timbuktu. No. Timbuktu is a key city in Mali. Zanzibar. Another? Kilwa, Mombasa, Mogadishu. Those are the big four. You just need to commit to memory one of those by name. All right? So again, Zanzibar, Kilwa, Mombasa, Mogadishu. What trade network did they directly participate in? Indian Ocean Trade Network. They're on the east coast of Africa. What religion do we see heavy influence for Malacca and the Swahili coast? Islam. There you go. All right? Mainly due to merchant activity. And then if we flip over, and then last ones for Afro-Eurasia, the Mongols, super important. And then the Khmer Empire, which we did one day on in the in the post-classical era first semester. That's in Southeast Asia. That's what's today Cambodia, heavily influenced by Buddhism. All right. And then last, flipping over to the Western Hemisphere, to the Americas, you've got the Aztecs, also called the Mexica, and the Inca. Don't be thrown off if you see Mexica. It's just the Aztec civilization. Okay. And those are the two major states, empires that we see. Which of these is going to be highly centralized? The Inca is highly centralized. Had a bureaucracy, really excellent road network, runner messengers. Whereas the Aztecs lacked a bureaucracy, strong centralized controls, a very decentralized state. Which one emphasizes terror tactics more so in order to maintain power? Aztecs. All right. Which ones used human sacrifice? Both of them did. The Aztecs were ruthless in terms of their practices. All right? So those are big ideas, big states, empires that you should be able to explain given a SAQ, LEQ, for state building. Are there any questions on state building before we move on? Let me know. This is the time to ask.
So
Karen?
all state building then?
What's that?
They're all state building?
Well, these are all examples that you should be able to pull examples from to discuss state building. For example, Mongols, in order to carry out their state building and administer their empires, what did they force upon the people they conquered? Tribute collection. There you go. What was their policy towards religious diversity in their empire? Extreme religious tolerance. They pretty much allowed anyone to practice whatever faith they wanted. They oftentimes adopted also the local faith wherever they were. For example, in China, when they established the Yuan dynasty, they became Buddhists and Taoists in particular. When they invaded the Middle East and conquered the Abbasids, what faith did they convert to? Islam. So good examples of religious tolerance for it. Give me one of these that was definitely not religiously tolerant. No, not so much. Byzantines were highly religiously intolerant. What form of Christianity did... Dang it. Well, let me ask you that. They were very enforcing of Christianity. What type of Christianity?
Roman Catholicism.
No. Orthodox Christianity, branch that developed by 1054 CE. All right? They're at odds with the Western European Roman Catholics. All right. Again, questions on any of that? Okay. Moving on then to economics. Global trade, which before what year do we have definitely separation between the old and new worlds? Before 1492, you should not be talking about Afro-Eurasians traveling to the Americas or vice versa, because it doesn't happen until the next era. So you've got a web of Afro-Eurasian trade networks, the Great Silk Road, Trans-Saharan, Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean. You should be able to explain reasons for commercial growth, right? Why there is generally a growth in trade. Give me a factor that would contribute to the growth of trade. Aaliyah?
The Mongols taking over.
All right, we see, in general, we see expansion of states and empires, oftentimes trying to protect trade, encouraging trade. And the Mongols are a good example of that for the post-classical era. But in general, states, empires, encouraging trade. Give us another. I thought someone had their hand raised. Another factor that encouraged commercial growth during this era. There were new commercial strategies, practices, technologies that were introduced in this era that helped promote trade, especially on the Silk routes. Not mercantilism. That's the next era for Western Europeans.
You mean?
New business practices that were introduced.
Oh, the Hanseatic League and everything?
That would be in Western Europe, Hanseatic League. So there are alliances of cities that promoted trade. I'm sorry? New commercial practices. What's going to facilitate the transfer of money between merchants? Paper money is introduced in China. All right? Paper money is introduced in China. There's others.
Silver.
What about it?
It was introduced and they made it like the currency.
No, wrong era. Wrong era. You're thinking about early modern era, the global flow of silver, not this post-classical period. I mean, silver was certainly used, but it's not the driving factor behind trade. Yep.
Mongols not looking at merchants as mean people anymore.
Okay, there's that. Yes, I mean, that's an example of how a specific state or empire is encouraging trade. Think about credit, the development of credit. Banking houses, aka banks. What are the infrastructure that's built along the Silk routes that help protect merchants, camel caravan merchants, as they travel along the Silk routes? Caravanserai. The Abbasid Caliphate, Mongols, they all built, promoted the caravanserai. All right. Those are all specific advances in commercial practices that are new for the post-classical era. We also see the expansion of Islam throughout all four of these trade networks. Muslim merchants are the predominant faith for most merchants on all four of these trade networks by the end of the era. They share a common culture. They have practiced Sharia law, which encourages merchant activity, protection for merchants, as long as they're Muslims. So as a result, you've got all these things that are contributing to commercial growth. We could also look at specific events like the Pax Mongolica, the Crusades, linking Asia to Western Europe in terms of trade. But regardless of the trade that's happening, where is the flow of wealth in Afro-Eurasia during the post-classical era?
China.
Towards Asia as a whole, all right? India, China, the Middle East. So for Africa and Europe, wealth is pouring into Asia as a result of their desire for luxury goods, okay? Part of this interregional trade network, or webs of the trade routes throughout Afro-Eurasia, are cross-cultural interactions. You should be able to explain how cultural features, whether technology, religion, cultural practices in general, transfer from one state or civilization to another. And there's a couple of different ways by which that occurs in this post-classical era. First off, conflicts. For example, the Crusades, which are fought between what groups? Christians and Muslims, especially Seljuk Turks and Western European Roman Catholics. There's a whole series of them. You just need to know approximately when they're happening. That's 1095 to 1291. Who's going to get the greater benefit of cross-cultural transfers in terms of technologies transferred? Western Europeans, by far. Give me some examples of technologies, knowledge that transfers from the Middle East or Asia to Western Europe. Yep. Nope.
Magnetic compass.
Nope. The astrolabe. Astrolabe. Give me another. Doesn't have to be a technology. It can be
Numbers.
some sort of
Arabic numerals.
Arabic numerals transfer to Western
Paper
Europe.
money?
What?
Paper money?
No, paper money is not transferred outside of Asia in this period. Not due to the Crusades.
Compass.
We just said that.
Movable
No. Oh my goodness. We got astrolabe. Indian numerals, soon to be called Arabic numerals. Algebra. Advanced medical knowledge. The concepts of latitude and longitude. Cartography. Study of maps, creation of highly accurate maps. All right, those are some major examples. You could also maybe argue the Latin sail also transfers from Dar al-Islam to Western Europe. Okay, so Western Europeans definitely get the benefit. Who gets the benefit of trade results here
China.
from the Crusades? How so? They're getting major wealth flowing into Asia from Western Europeans, but Western Europeans get a greater access and taste for Asian spices and porcelain, cotton cloth, and that's going to help to grow their urban areas in Western Europe. Give me one example of an Italian city-state that grows because of wealth transfers or economic transfers from the Crusades. Alyssa?
Venice.
Venice, right? One of those city-states. And that's a result of an impact from growth of trade in general during this era, is the rise of these small independent city-states. Okay, but yes, in the long run, wealth is still flowing into Asia. When's that going to change? In what era are we going to see the change, the shift for Asia, from Asia gaining wealth from the wider world to now losing it? Yep. Not the early modern. What? The era of Western hegemony. We don't see really till 1800 thereabouts that changing. So up until that point, Asia still has that favorable balance of trade. We also see cross-cultural transfers from state interactions. So just one state or nation or empire interacting directly with another. And there is oftentimes overlap, right? But here's a couple examples the College Board says you need to know. From the Tang Dynasty to the Abbasids. Do you remember what transfer happens there? Technological transfer. It helped to increase literacy in the long run, and it's not the printing press.
The examine.
No, it's paper. Paper making technology. How to make paper. All right. It first developed back in the classical era in China. Well, it spreads via interactions between the Tang and the Abbasids along what trade route? Silk roads. Yep. All right. The ultimate is the Pax Mongolica. All right. 1200s to 1300s. If you don't remember any other years for this era, I would say this is it. All right. 1200s to 1300s. That's that period of prosperity, stability. Once the Mongol Khanates have expanded and control most of Asia, with the exception of like India and Southeast Asia. But remember that they conquered the Song Dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, and Kievan Rus. Those are three major ones. But give me now examples of technologies that transferred across Eurasia because of Mongol expansion in the Pax Mongolica. Now a lot of things you were trying to tell me earlier about the Crusades applies here. Gunpowder technology, associate that with Mongol expansion. Keep going.
Compass.
The magnetic compass. And one more thing that's also going to increase literacy across Eurasia. The movable type printing press. There you go. Those are the big three. Okay. So by the end of the era, Western Europeans, by about 1450, have those three things. Magnetic compass, gunpowder technology, and also the printing press. There we go. All right. By the way, what kind of, or give me examples of states that arose as a result of the collapse of the Mongols. New states or empires that arose as a result of the collapse of the Mongol Empire.
Russian.
The Russian Empire arose under the Tsars. Good. Give me another.
Ottomans.
All these Turkic peoples arise and establish gunpowder empires by the next start of the next era. Yeah, Ottoman Empire, Safavid Empire, There's one more major one that we talked about in India. That was the Mughal Empire. What about in China? What replaced the Mongols there? The Ming Dynasty. Good. All right. So they all had their roots here, almost all of them, with the collapse of the Mongols by the end of the post-classical era. All right. Another example would be Byzantine Empire influencing Kiev and Rus. What religion did they help spread into Kiev and Rus?
Christianity.
What type?
Orthodox.
Orthodox Christianity. They also helped spread the dome structures that we see commonly in Russia, inspired from the Hagia Sophia. The Cyrillic alphabet that was based on the Byzantine Greek alphabet becomes adopted in Russia. And the use of icons as well. And then last, China had a series of tributary states, those peripheral states, where the tributary states acknowledged the greatness and superiority of Tang and Song China, for example. They gave gifts, ambassadors, and representatives of the governments of these tributary states gave gifts and kowtowed before the Chinese Son of Heaven. What are some cross-cultural transfers we see going from China to surrounding tributary states? Actually, before that, we need to identify those tributary states. There's three major ones. Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Which one was the most open to sinification, the adoption of Chinese culture? Korea, most open. Japan would be next, and then Vietnam was the most resistant to it. What do we see transferring to all three from China? There is Confucian traditions, but not as well adopted in Vietnam. But the one that's common for all three is Buddhism. All right, Buddhism adopted in all three. We see what type of Confucianism being adopted strongly in Korea and Japan. What? Neo-Confucianism. Good. All right. Another big topic that we see with cross-cultural transfers is the movement of Turkic peoples, or migrations, with examples being the Turkic peoples. They move in as the Abbasids collapse, and also as the Mongols collapse. They were pastoral nomads, just like the Mongols. And usually they adopted Islam, and they maintained the culture of Islam as they move into the Middle East. And then we've already covered the Mongols, the ultimate example of a pastoral nomadic migratory group. Okay? Questions there on any of those? All right, then last thing, commerce, which we've already talked about, transfer of goods. Think about what type of products are transferred. Always you've got luxury goods, and think about that balance of global or interregional trade. No questions on these, though. Okay, part of that cross-cultural transfer is specifically the spread of particular religions. You should definitely know for this era, if you don't remember any others, you should be able to discuss inside and out the spread of Islam. You wrote a Changes and Continuities Over Time essay on this topic back in the first semester. But the spread of religions, think about causes and effects of the spread of religions, but especially Islam. Give me some particular factors that contribute to the spread of Islam from the Middle East to other regions. Yep.
They encouraged merchant activity.
Merchant activity was embraced. Remember that Muhammad and his first wife Khadijah, they were merchants. So it was this merchant culture built into Islam. It's encouraged by Sharia law as well. What else? Other factors that help spread Islam. Oh, what's always your go-to? If you've got some sort of transfer of culture from one place to another. Trade, all right? Commerce is always a go-to. So commercial activity. Muslim merchants spreading their faith from one area to another. What did these merchants, Muslim merchants, oftentimes establish in faraway lands where they went and did their business? And they usually set up new homes with new families, had kids, and integrated their original faith with the local traditions. Diasporic communities. Give me some examples of cities that had Islamic diasporic communities.
China did, right?
There are some in China, like in Chang'an, capital of post-classical China. Give me a city-state in Southeast Asia. Malacca. What about in sub-Saharan Africa?
Mali.
I need a city.
Timbuktu.
Timbuktu, major city in Mali. Yep. On the Swahili coast, give me one city. Zanzibar. There you go. We'll run with those. All right. But however, I'm sorry, I'm not done with that. Give me another group that is contributing to the spread of Islam, especially through the Indian Ocean trade network and Silk routes.
Missionaries.
Who was the major missionary force for Islam? Because there are no monks or nuns in Islam. There are no monastics.
The Sikhs.
Sufis, there you go. They're the ones that have that mystical experience with God, the spinning, dancing, long, deep meditation, taking drugs, whatever the case may be. Hold off on that. So experiencing God in that way, they interact with the local populations, and they're very tolerant of local religious traditions. They allow local peoples to maintain a lot of their traditions and embrace it alongside basic beliefs of Allah. All right. Buddhism. Give me the two major trade networks Buddhism spreads along in this post-classical era. Great Silk Road and the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Give me a specific state that we see adopting Buddhism in this era. The what? The Khmer Empire. The Khmer Empire in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. Do you remember the name of their major Buddhist temple, the Khmer Empire? If you had me, I know we analyzed it. Angkor Wat. Excellent. Very good. All right. And then last, Neo-Confucianism, which we've already addressed, becomes adopted in Korea and Japan, but without the foot binding. Thank goodness. All right. Last things to wrap up. Another big thing that we discussed was environmental consequences of connectivity. So thinking about how different states, empires, people around Afro-Eurasia are connected with one another. For example, we see major crop transfers in this era. Should you be discussing the Columbian Exchange with the post-classical era?
No.
Absolutely not. What year do you need to associate the Columbian Exchange with? 1492 and onwards. So this is not that crop transfer. Can you think of specific examples of crop transfers from the post-classical era, circa 1200 to 1450?
Champa rice.
Always, just remember Champa rice. That spread from where to where?
Vietnam.
From Vietnam
To
to China, to Tang and Song China. And that's a reflection of that tributary status. What impact did this introduction of quick ripening Champa rice to China have on, from Vietnam on China? What was the impact? Any time that you have additional food supplies, increased food surplus, it's going to support larger populations. So throughout history, China has always maintained that #1 spot in terms of global populations. So that helps with that. Can you give me another example or other examples of crop transfers from one region to another? Yep.
Manioc.
No, not manioc.
Greek plant.
That's Columbian Exchange. I need specific plants, crops that transfer from one region to another.
Oh, sugar coming from the Americas to the
No, should you be talking about the Americas and connecting to Afro-Eurasia? Not in the post-classical era.
Spices from like India to the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's like finished spices. I'm talking about where they are uprooting plants, introducing seeds,
Potatoes.
and now growing it in a different place. What?
Citrus fruit.
Citrus fruits. Cotton plants.
Silk.
Citrus fruits, cotton plants, and rice. Those three are introduced from South Asia and Southeast Asia into the Middle East, the Mediterranean world. And that's within the context of what cultural area for this era? That's within Dar al-Islam. All right, so connections between Muslim merchants, cultures, because they're spreading to South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, all coming from the Middle East. So you've got this large area of the world where it's much easier to transfer, more likely to transfer new crops. Regardless of the result, you have increased population where you have new food supplies. All right? Pandemics. You have the post-classical era. What should be the thing that you are automatically going to? Black Death. Spread of plague pandemics is how you'll probably see it on the May exam. Plague pandemics. It spread largely in the context of what empire? The Mongol Empire, Pax Mongolica. From China and Central Asia all the way across into the Middle East, into Eastern Europe and Western Europe. What was the impact from the spread of the Black Death into Western Europe? Yep.
The end of serfdom.
A weakening of serfdom. Peasants started demanding what from their noble lords?
Payment, wages.
Wages. Did the nobles give them their increased demand for wages? No. All right. But the result was, peasants accept that? No. We see peasant rebellions spreading all across Western Europe. Peasant rebellions. And even though they're always crushed, they wind up convincing noble lords to grant them greater freedoms within the feudal system. So Black Death has the effect of weakening really strict feudalism in Western Europe. It also has impacts on on the cities. In what way?
Did they use it to conquer more land?
Well, Mongols did. There's reports on that. What is the overall trend we see with a lot of cities due to the spread of Black Death by the 1300s or mid 1300s? Yep.
The population goes down.
Yeah, there's a lot of cities that they disappear. They are not as strong as they were before, but things are going to help them to bounce back by the end of the era. Like the increased spread of new commercial practices like banking, all right, and credit being extended in use, more widespread currency systems. And generally overall, that we know their economy is going to bounce back, all right? Last thing in terms of content, Little Ice Age. I didn't know where else to put it. Little Ice Age, that was that temporary global downturn in the northern hemisphere's average temperature. So yeah, it got colder longer, but more so was heavier rains, and it may have impacted Mongol expansion. But we see that starting in the post-classical era, and it goes all the way till 1850, right? So it's a long-term climate change. All right. Last thing, I just want to throw this out here because you are definitely going to see it. I see students every year getting hung up on this. You're not the first guys to do it. But when it comes to multiple choice questions, any of your SAQ, LAQ, DBQ prompts, this will really screw you up if you do not stay laser focused on these words and what they mean. So don't get thrown off by any of these terms. If a prompt asks for political things, they're asking about government. All right, thinking about state building, how a government operates, leadership, that's the focus. What is the government doing? That's political. If you see economic, we're talking about trade, money. All right, who gets what and how, whether it's within the state or between states. So if you start talking about economics, or if you get a prompt about economics, but you just talk about government, or things about how merchants stand in the social hierarchy, you're not answering the prompt. And that will really mess you up in terms of points. Okay? So be careful. Same with social. We're talking about social hierarchy, the standing of people. And you see cultural, we're talking about things like technology, religion, family structure, whether matriarchal, patriarchal. So be careful when you see those terms. With that, that is your really big overview of the post-classical era. What we did in about 2 months, we covered in about 20 minutes. Are there questions on that? Maybe 30. Nope. We're good. I sure hope I press record.